So let's bring in CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Major Garrett. Joins me now from the White House. Thanks for joining us, Major. Let us start now with what the Vice President has on his agenda. We mentioned that he's meeting with certain groups, but what else is taking place in terms of this outreach effort to win people over and win support for this health care bill?
Well, let's talk about this very specific outreach today here at the White House, meeting with groups opposed to abortion rights and talking to them about two issues very important to them and their network of supporters around the country that the White House wants to rally to pressure conservatives still not sold on the existing health care replacement legislation drafted by the House Republican leadership. And the two things that are going to be talked about most today are fulfilling a campaign promise from then-candidate Trump and a long-standing political orientation from the Vice President, Mike Pence. He believed this entirely through his career in the House of Representatives, meaning that there should be no taxpayer subsidies of any kind to Planned Parenthood, an organization that those on the conservative side of the political spectrum and who are opposed to abortion rights say take that federal money, enlarge their budget, and then use it indirectly to support abortion services in the country. Planned Parenthood says no, the federal funds are used entirely for health care services unrelated to abortions, but nevertheless, those on the conservative side of the spectrum very much want to defund Planned Parenthood at the federal level. And that's something that Vice President Pence is going to promise these groups opposed to abortion rights this bill will do, and the White House will fight for that. There's another component to this debate as well. Since 1976, there's been a piece of legislation known as the Hyde Amendment. It restricts all Medicaid funds from paying for abortions, and it has since 1976. It was slightly enlarged in the mid-1990s to allow for some funding of abortions in cases of rape and incest. These groups, who are meeting with the Vice President today, opposed to abortion rights, want that Hyde Amendment language also in the health care reform bill. And that's going to be tricky from a legislative drafting point of view for lots of arcane reasons I won't go into now. But they want commitments from this White House that they're going to fight for that in order to put the full weight of their activist support behind this health care legislation. So this is part and parcel of a persistent White House effort to take those groups who have large networks of supporters, bring them on board, identify the issues that they care about, make promises to them, and then have those activists around the country with those groups pressure lawmakers not yet sold on this bill. So when you said full court press, applying all the various measures of persuasion and other tactics here at the White House, they are fully in play. And today, for the Vice President, the big part of that conversation will be about federal funds, abortion, and Planned Parenthood.
Right. And as seems quite often with this administration, they would like us all to focus on one thing, but a distraction pops up. And the most recent one, the administration is dealing with some fallout over news that former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who had to resign, had, prior to taking on his role with the Trump administration and the campaign, had actually been working as a lobbyist for Turkey. He called himself a foreign agent. The Vice President reacted to this revelation in an interview. I want to play that for you, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
Hearing that story today was the first I heard of it. And I fully support the decision that President Trump made to ask for General Flynn's resignation.
You're disappointed by the story?
The first I heard of it, and I think it is an affirmation of the President's decision to ask General Flynn to resign.
So, Major, as head of the transition team, shouldn't the Vice President have been aware that a candidate for National Security Advisor had been working as a foreign agent? Just not to take a phrase away from the administration, but perhaps extreme vetting should have started there?
Absolutely. I mean, this goes not only to Vice President Pence, who was put in charge of the transition after it was taken away from New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, but everyone, including then President-elect Trump, should have known this. Those who now represent him in the highest levels of his government, Steve Bannon, Chief Advisor, Reince Priebus, the Chief of Staff, Kellyanne Conway, all the people associated with building the future White House team should have known this. And if they did know it and pretended not to know, then that's a real scandal. It appears that they didn't know and that there were a lot of issues related to the president's decision to demand the resignation from his first national security advisor, General Flynn. It wasn't a ask and answer sort of thing. Essentially, Flynn was fired. At the time it was told to us and to the public, it was because he gave inaccurate information to the vice president about his contacts with the Russian ambassador. But clearly there were other issues involved, and it is now obvious this was one of those issues. Flynn was not candid, he was not truthful, and he was essentially a living, breathing embodiment of the things that the president was trying to campaign against: drain the swamp, eliminate the outsized influence, so he said frequently on the campaign, of those working as lobbyists or foreign agents. And here Mike Flynn was doing essentially that very same work right under the nose of the Trump transition. It is a significant embarrassment. It's not a distraction. This is somebody who the president invested with one of the most important roles in the White House, and that person turned out to be far less than trustworthy, and candid with the people he was apparently trying to work for, even though he was secretly working for somebody else.
Lastly, Major, before we let you go, I want to ask you about FBI Director James Comey. He traveled to Capitol Hill to talk with members of the House and Senate. What do you know happened in that conversation? Can you give us any insight?
I don't know nearly as much as I'd like to know, I'll tell you that. So he didn't meet with a great number of members of Congress or the United States Senate, a very, very select group. It is known in the vernacular around Washington as the Gang of Eight. You might have heard Gang of Eight dealing with immigration. No, this is a completely different Gang of Eight. This is the 4 members in both chambers, House and Senate, of the Select Intelligence Committees, Republicans and Democrats. So Comey met with the senators, then he met with the House members. We are led to believe one of the things he intended to tell them was that there was no warrant for any kind of surveillance of President Trump at Trump Tower, which of course is something the president alleged on Twitter on Saturday and has said nothing about since, and this White House has had no end of difficulty trying to explain, contextualize, and try to get out from under an allegation that to this hour still has not one shred of proof placed behind it. We don't know exactly what Comey told those members of the intelligence committees. They are, by temperament and by many rules governing their inclusion on those committees, very limited in what they can say about ongoing investigations. But the briefing occurred. Nobody ran to the microphones to say something that was different than what we've been led to believe. And the thing we've been most led to believe is that the FBI director was deeply displeased by the president's accusation and wanted the Justice Department leadership to put out a statement knocking it down, refuting it. That hasn't happened, so this confrontation continues. The only difference is there's been an intervening briefing with members of Congress and probably more public testimony to come.
All right, Major Garrett at the White House. Thanks a lot, Major.
Sure.